Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Freedom Papers, hosted by me, Morgan Zegers, your favorite history nerd in existence, powered by Turning Point USA, and we have a new special guest. Special? I don't really know. We got a new special guest over here, and it's Jon Root, Johnny Root. Jon, I'll give a little tease. He hosts TPUSA Live. You're a contributor to Turning Point, like myself, and you also host Breakaway, which is a sports show. So, you know, I learn a lot because I don't watch many sports. Now, you're being gracious and coming on my show, so I guess I'll have to go talk about sports one day with you. I don't know how good of an episode that'll be, but welcome, Jon. Thanks for joining.
You think you could talk about sports for about an hour?
Heck yeah, I could. I told you I was like the captain of my soccer team. Hello. I am queen of sports.
Well, yeah, I
peaked in high school.
I'll return the favor.
Okay, thank you so much. And what else do you do here? Tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I try to do it all, really. I mean, I'm hosting TPUSA Live Monday through Friday, and I love when you join. It's always fun. I know we had a great show the other day. It's always a good time.
That was aggressive. That was a lot.
It was.
It was with me, John, Isabel, and Stephen Davis, MAGA Hulk. So it was quite the cast right there.
Oh, yeah. And then, obviously, I host Breakaway, like you said, and then we obviously have just a lot of other little things that we get dragged into. There's always little ad reads.
Like this.
And then I get dragged into stuff like this. And I was like, oh, I'll jump in there. I'll be second fiddle. Sure. Whenever you need me.
Oh.
No, but honestly, it's fun to be here. I'm so excited to talk about this because I do watch the show. I don't really understand everything about the Federalist Papers, but I do learn a lot, and that's why I like shows like this.
Oh, thank you. Well, that's the goal. This is very introductory for everybody, and so I always encourage everyone, you guys remember, read the papers on your own, and then also join us for the podcast. That's the best thing.
So do your own research? That's what you're telling people to do?
I am very against just getting your political opinions and copying whatever somebody behind a microphone says, but that's why this is like more of a discussion. It's more of a conversation. After we've kind of touched on the papers, then we can all have this discussion together. So that's what I focus on. No shame at all with the whole not knowing much about the Federalist Papers. I don't know if I told you this, when I got the offer for Freedom Papers from Turning Point, and they were like, we want you to do it on the papers, all this stuff, I, the nerd that I am like, oh yeah, here we go. And I buy
History, I'm your gal.
I bought like 5 copies of this. I went to Barnes & Noble, got like a leather bound version as well, because I was like, I'm going to sleep next to this. I'm so excited, right? And then everybody, all my friends were like, congratulations. What are those? And I was like, you don't know?
But I love when somebody has a book like that. It kind of reminds me when you go to church and someone's got, if you have a brand new Bible, maybe if it's like right after Christmas or their birthday or something, but when you have a really worn book, that's when you know someone's really gotten into it. It's got, look, all those sticky notes, you got all those highlights, and then it looks like it literally just went through a world war.
It's lost some pages.
That's when you know someone actually knows about the Federalist Papers. So just show people this without saying anything, and like, she knows what she's talking about.
Oh, thanks, Jon. I appreciate it. Well, that's the thing. I wanted to kind of walk you through some things, and I usually do a recap because sometimes we get new listeners, and I want them to be fully up to date. And if anybody's repeating or listening to this episode and they're constant listeners, you need to hear this again because the repetition will help us remember. Now, the Federalist Papers, Jon, I'm gonna explain this very basically for you.
I feel like I'm the student in the class. I gotta do crisscross applesauce. I'm like, sure, story time. Tell me.
Okay, so basically, put yourself in 1776.
I'm gonna close my eyes for this.
It's chaos. There's fighting. You've just declared independence. You just told King George, a monarch, the biggest world power in existence, that you are going to declare independence and you're no longer going to be under his rule. You're going to go to war with him. So things are a little chaotic at the time. And it was in one of these papers, in one of the previous papers, that everybody was very stressed out. Obviously, nobody's in a really healthy, stable mindset when you've just declared independence from Britain. So when they first tried to make a government, it was the Articles of Confederation, and it just wasn't perfect. And Publius says, you know what? You trusted us, you, the people of America, trusted us, and we kind of messed up a little bit, but will you trust us again to come up with a new form of government that makes some minor adjustments and creates a federal government? So that's when, in 1787, about 10 years later, they wrote the Constitution, and then the states had to ratify the Constitution. And so that's really where the Federalist Papers come in. Some states did not want to ratify, including New York State, which is a big one. And so
the place that you're from.
I'm from upstate. Yeah. Did you know I'm also I was born and raised right by the Saratoga battlefield.
Really?
The
I didn't know that.
Turning Point USA. The turning point of the Revolutionary War. Yeah, pretty big deal. So pretty proud of that.
Another example that she knows what she's talking about.
Oh, thank you so much. So yeah, I live right by the Saratoga battlefield, which I think is awesome. For those of you guys who don't know, it was the battle that we finally kind of turned the war and we started actually winning, and then it led to our eventual victory overall. But so you put yourself back in the situation. The founders have now written the U.S. Constitution, but some states, even though they have to ratify, they don't want to. So Hamilton, James Madison, John Jay, they all get together and they start writing essays in local New York State, New York City newspapers. And all of those essays were eventually put together, the 85 of them, that made the case for why we should be a union, why we should have the Constitution. The first half of the essays were basically like, we are safer as a union, why we should have a union.
So people could look at this like now, like if there's just an opinion piece that gets thrown in there, and that's kind of what it was like. You'd go to the opinion section of the newspaper kind of to understand this?
Yeah, he kind of submitted it. Like he would submit them to the local papers and hope that the people would read them and make their mind up on if they should vote to ratify or not. So it's really cool, right? It was like a classic PR campaign put out by the founders and the Federalists that were on the side of ratification. And all of the first essays made the case for why we should be a union, why we shouldn't be dissolved into little confederacies, into little states. We should have a federal government. And then the second half basically went through every issue that people who didn't want to ratify had with the Constitution and what parts of the government would look like under the Constitution, what our structure would be like as a nation if we did ratify. And so they were released over a certain period of time, and what do you know, we ended up ratifying. And then eventually later on, they were all put together into what is called the Federalist Book. So
do you think probably the biggest pushback was a lot of people are just so used to their ways coming from Europe, and then it seemed like just a dramatic change that people just didn't want to, I don't know. I think people were so used to the European system. You come here and it's like, well, there's this umbrella over all of us, and we're like one body but separate parts, and how does that work?
Like people always say, oh, the British are coming, that classic saying that everybody thought Paul Revere said when the enemy was coming that night in Boston and Massachusetts. But that's not the case. They actually said the redcoats are coming because a lot of the people in America considered themselves British. They didn't consider themselves to be people of a new country. They didn't want to be. They were just people that were from Britain that now lived in the new land under Britain's rule. And so they didn't say the British are coming. And now we say that all the time as if that's what happened. But when you understand those little stories of history, you can understand more of what the mindset was. The big problem that people had with the Constitution is they just fought a Revolutionary War against, or they were in the process of fighting it and then had just won a Revolutionary War against a monarch that was oppressing them. And they were worried that the Constitution would create monarchy and anarchy, or monarchy and tyranny. And so if you look at the Anti-Federalist Papers, they are aggressive. Like the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists are sassy. It's politics today, just like it was back then. You see the same kind of behavior, the same kind of name calling, the same kind of accusations that people don't have good intentions, that they're lying to you, that we have your best intentions.
That's why I'm glad you say stuff like that, because a lot of people, I think they look back on history and they think, wow, what's happening now? It never happened before. Like these conversations, these accusations, the rhetoric being used. That's why I think it's important to bring that up, because it's like this has been going on for a long time, but because of little papers like this and documents that we have, we're able to make a way forward.
Yeah, it's politics, baby. That's just how it is. And so that's why I really like it. And the Anti-Federalists were worried about, the Constitution. They aggressively say, like, this is the most oppressive document ever, and it's going to lead to monarchy and tyranny. Did it? And that's where we're in a very unique time, John. And I mentioned this to Connor Clegg when he was on the show, that people give me a hard time about this podcast because they say, well, Morgan, the Federalists were wrong. Our founders were wrong because the Constitution led to this point that we're in now as the country is crumbling. They see it as not fixable. They see it as this is clearly a failed state. The Constitution failed. And I always try and tell them, no. If you read these documents, if you read their intentions, their explanation of what the government should look like, you'll just see that it's not the Constitution that failed. It's the politicians today that have abandoned it completely. And this version, I'll give you a copy of this. This version is by Charles Kessler. He writes an intro. And in it, he says when the Federalists wrote the Federalist Papers, they were saying that the Constitution is a document worthy of the rational and enduring consent of an enlightened public. do we have an enlightened public, John?
No.
So
no,
I
we
think
talk
there's
about
two
that
things
all the
there.
time. We have a lot of people. Even in the beginning of the show, I'm making just kind of a cheeky comment, like telling people to do their own research. People don't do that now, and that's why I love on the show. I feel like periodically, people are going to bring up like Frederick Douglass, someone that's gone through way more than any of us could ever imagine, way more than LeBron James could ever imagine, and. You know what he said?
Sports.
I got to bring in a little sports. But someone like that saying, you know what? You guys aren't living up to these documents. What is written here? This is not just inherently evil, inherently racist. No, you guys need to live up to this. These words here, if you actually believe it, will make a difference here. And that's what I love. People need to do their own research. They need to understand that.
Yeah, and so I see it as our politicians have failed us because they have distorted the documents so much. They have abandoned the documents and the principles of America's founding so much. And then our population has gotten so dangerously complacent that we no longer even care enough and understand that it requires our republic, if it wants to last, if we want it to continue, it requires us being smart. And I don't mean we all have to be smarty pants. I just mean we all have to care enough to know and be intelligent enough to understand the structure of government that we have. And we can't even do that. I mean, asking people to do that is ridiculous. I did something on people get so frustrated with me over the dumbest stuff, John. I said something about how we should all be conscious consumers around the holidays because I think it's ridiculous that we buy our loved ones Christmas presents from communist China, where the presents are being made by mostly slave labor or are connected to slave labor in some way, whether it's the raw materials or the transition into the packaging, whatever it may be. And I think it's gross because a present on Christmas, Jesus' birthday of all days, is supposed to be it's supposed to be a symbol of like caring for someone. And so if I give you a present because I care about you, John, is it a little gross for me to get a present that's cheaply made with $0 of added cost for the cost of labor into the price because it was made in communist China under slave labor? That's kind of gross to me. People were like, Morgan, you're such a Grinch. Well, what? No, I'm just asking you to care a little bit about being a conscious consumer.
And I think a lot of people have been naive. A lot of people have been naive what's going on, especially when we have a supply chain crisis that happens now. A lot of people are starting to understand where, shelves are empty. And then the toys that you're trying to get for your kids, where are those actually coming from? But once you find out the truth about that, I think it's when people need to be open and honest that, hey, this is not something that I should be getting my kid. I mean, I love the movie Jingle All the Way. Have you ever seen that Christmas movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger? It's all about this specific toy that he's trying to get for his kid. It's called a Turbo Man. And in the movie, he's just a big superhero. And that's what everybody's worried about is, I got to get my kid this because this is what my kid wants. And then if your kids are telling you now, like, oh, I want my Paw Patrol little toy. And if you find out that's being made with slave labor, maybe you should obviously you can't sit down your kid that's like 3 years old and like, here, kid, let me tell you about the CCP and the genocide that's going on over there.
But that's like me with my child. I'm going to be like, listen, kid.
Sit down. You're growing up today. You're going to learn today.
No, I'll find a better
way
to
I think
do
parents and people need to, once you understand where these toys and these products are coming from, you realize that this is nothing that you should be supporting.
Yeah. Well, and to take it a step further, sports connection here.
Ooh, I like this.
I do believe this all goes back to the founding documents and America's founding principles. We have to have a caring and enduringly consenting population that is actively participating in keeping the republic going. And we don't have that when we have people that are willing to not learn about the republic's structure, not willing to learn about our federalist system and how checks and balances occur in the country. Because look at now we're doing the mandate crap and people don't know if they should quit their job before they're fired. And I have to tell them, no, we're going to be able to fight this. We have a system of checks and balances. You can't just be told what to do by an executive order that then leaves or ends with you getting fired from your job because you won't get an injection into your body. It's like this transition. If people understood the federalist system, they wouldn't be so scared of Biden mandates. They would be like, oh, okay, I'm a person in this country and I have power because the founders gave me power. We have to coordinate at a local level, state level, and fight our way up against tyrants like you. That should be the mindset. We should also have people that care enough to be conscious consumers, but taking it a step further with this whole communist China stuff, once you know where the product comes from, like as soon as I interview a survivor, as soon as I hear a story, I go, I can't in my heart of hearts purchase this product knowing that this is the origin. And what I want to ask you is in that same mentality of we need people to care more about these principles of having more dignity in their actions, same thing with the Olympics.
Yep.
Do you feel that, where people are like, well, the athletes worked their whole lives for this moment to go to the Olympics, and we don't want to take that away from them? I'm sorry, but with some things, you should stand up a little more, because some things matter more than that moment on stage. What do you think about that?
Yeah, because what Press Secretary Jen Psaki said, obviously bringing up genocide, we talked about that on TV USA Live. Using that word, I think, is very effective in letting people know this is not just some sort of atrocity. Like, no, this is a genocide. What's happening over there is the worst of the worst. Everyone's always going to think about Nazi Germany. And then what's happening here, this is even worse. And a lot of people need to know the truth. So when it comes to the Olympics and you hear that there's going to be some sort of diplomatic boycott, I think it's effective in some ways, but there's going to be no one 10, 15, 20 years from now that said, where are those, the government officials? That's who we wanted to see at the Olympics. Do you have any highlights of that? No. We're going to see the highlights of our American athletes out there. And obviously we're going to go out there and we're going to kick some booty. I'm not going to say the other word. I really wanted to.
No, it's a wholesome podcast.
It's a very wholesome podcast. I'm sorry that I even thought that. But the way we're going to make a difference is not only telling people the truth, like Enes Kanter Freedom. He's gone on multiple different newscasts and said, this is what's going on. They do not live up to the Olympic standard. Because when you think of a place like Beijing, they're given the honor of the Olympics. And you need to live up to these Olympic standards about competition, fair play, sportsmanship, and the beauty of competition. Beijing doesn't stand up to any of those standards at all. And I always try to say this with as much humility as possible, because I know athletes work really, really hard to get to this place. This might be some athletes' only Olympics. This might be some athletes' final Olympics. This might be some athletes not being able to get their Olympic records that they've been working their whole life for. But this is more than just your individual awards or just, hey, we can kick some booty in the Olympics for a few weeks. This is about standing up for what is right. This is about talking about the atrocities that are going on in this place, and they do not deserve the honor of hosting this place. But if they do, we should not be there. A diplomatic boycott is not enough, but we need people to know the truth, and we need these players to know the truth as well and speak on it on our soil. Because if they talk about it over there, it's going to be a Peng Shui situation.
Absolutely.
We have no idea that she's safe at all. The IOC can't confirm it. Her family and friends can't confirm it. The CCP definitely won't confirm it. But if we had one of our athletes out there that said something that was a little off color in their own idea, I don't know if they would be safe.
Well, that's exactly, there's a lot of problems with this, but one of those is the more we downplay the CCP, the more we act like they're not a problem, they're just another competitor on the world stage, the more dangerous it is, because we're dealing with a regime that is now fully accused, especially by the press secretary of the President of the United States. That was a big deal. I don't give the Biden regime a lot of kudos for much that they do, but I will give them credit for doing this. They labeled it genocide, thank goodness. Now, if we are allowed to tell our athletes, well, we aren't going to go, the politicians aren't going to go, but you're safe over there, where they disappear doctors that talk about the truth of COVID-19's origins, where they disappear athletes that dare to speak out about the regime, where they send people to re-education camps where they're then forced through slave labor that, then make your Nike shoes that you're wearing.
These aren't conspiracy theories. This is
real.
really happening.
It's
These
real.
are human rights issues.
It's not safe. Yeah. That's why I'm like, this isn't just, hypothesis of, what might happen, or the hypothetical, we don't know, that might happen, you might be in danger. No, you would be, because you're dealing with an evil regime. And you're right about, we aren't going to remember in 20 years if the politicians were there or not. I didn't even know that politicians did that at the Olympics, first of all. But want to know what we all remember about the Olympics that happened in Nazi Germany? Because those Olympics happened before the world knew that there was a genocide. So that at that time, it was just a very discriminatory regime. And Hitler was known for discriminating against people of color. And so that black athlete, Jesse Owens, is the iconic image of that Olympics in Nazi Germany, because before anybody even knew it was really going on, imagine having the courage back then to still stand up for your values when you are alone and you put your, what did he do? He stood and he put his fist up. Yep. That's the iconic image that everybody remembers, and that was before we even knew. So now that we know, oh, this is a regime that's killed more people than Nazi Germany, that has concentration camps, that does XYZ, and it's the commie China from the 20th century. People always like to see them as different beings. It's the same regime, you guys. Same one as the one-child policy, the Tiananmen Square massacre, the Cultural Revolution, the Great Leap Forward, all the bad stuff that happened. We are dealing with the same regime. Now that we know this, I don't know how any athlete could say, it's worth it for me to go to this. But I think it's very indicative of how bad the situation is in the country with the mindset that we have and the understanding we have of global issues because of the media, because of the education system, and because of the culture that we have here now.
Because the Olympics, I've always said, it's just like sports. Brings people together unlike anything else. It has the ability to, at least. So I've talked about for a long time, I love sports. And to see where sports has gone, and then now with the Olympics here, you have the ability to make such a massive difference on the world stage, because forget all the, hey, you have different countries come together that normally wouldn't, and you're bringing people together unlike anything else. Here, you have this could be remembered forever. We just need, I think, one athlete, just one, and I think that's a spark that could really light this fire. And I don't think it's going to be like a Shaun White. I don't know if it's going to be a real big name, but hopefully there is one athlete that is brave enough and courageous enough to say, hey, they don't have to get into the whole COVID-19 thing or anything. Just get into just specific, I think, not manipulative, but get into people's emotions. Make them actually understand the atrocities that are happening here and say, hey, I'm going to put my athletic ability aside and say, hey, I might not be able to make another Olympics. Who knows? Because it's very difficult to get there. But I think if one person just says, I'm not going to go, you might see a domino effect. You might see some other athletes that say, you know what, that is the truth. And I'm willing to do this for those people that can't speak up for themselves.
Yeah, well, it's going to take a lot of sacrifice and not suffering or struggling, but obviously giving up something like that, a dream like that, is a struggle. But it's going to take a lot of sacrifice and a lot of feeling uncomfortable for people, I think, over the next decade or two as we fight against this world power that is turning more and more evil and more powerful as the day goes by. It's disturbing to me.
Well, some of the most effective things you can do in your life is the things that are uncomfortable.
Oh,
I mean,
Jon,
whether it's...
Love that.
I mean, that's talked about in the Bible quite a bit. As Christians, we're not called to be comfortable at all. And if you're doing something that's comfortable, maybe you should start to have this 30,000-foot view and realize why it's comfortable. Because it's of the world. And it's easy. You can go with the flow. The goalpost is constantly going to change. But if you stick to a specific foundation in your faith, and then here with America, if you stick to our foundations and our values that talk about, equality, we talk about diversity, we talk about standing up for human rights. If you truly believe in those values, you're going to stand up against this, and it's going to be wildly uncomfortable. And you do that all the time. Everybody we have on the show, what you talk about on social media every day, and a lot of people here at Turning Point USA, people that we have at our events, they talk about stuff that are wildly uncomfortable. They lose friends, they lose family, they lose jobs. But sometimes the most uncomfortable stuff are the most worth it, because that's how you can make a difference.
No, I agree. And that's really what the founders were really focusing on when they took this leap. I mean, when they signed the Declaration of Independence, they all thought they were going to get murdered. Like that, they didn't know that they were actually going to successfully win a revolutionary war after fighting it. No. I mean, they kind of hodgepodged it for quite some time and then got international support and then were able to win. And they certainly had no idea that they were going to actually be able to make a government of, by, and for the people. And so all of that started with a risk with no guaranteed result. And that's, I think people are easily able to look at history and say, well, yeah, I mean, our founders did this and then they created this country and it kind of sucks and all this stuff. But when you put yourself in the mindset of a government like this had never existed until the moment of 1776 when the people decided to say, I think we could really try this if we looked at history and learned all the lessons and put something together. That's exceptional. But it depends on your mindset that you have. And the more we teach comparative history, I think we're going to benefit in the sense of building greater respect for where America came from, where we are today, and how far we've progressed. And then also handling international issues that we're dealing with today, like what's happening in China, where we can see that that's true oppression. And it's up to us, free people, to stand up for those that are less fortunate. makes me really sad.
I always think of the analogy between like the spoiled boyfriend or girlfriend, where all they're going to remember is just the negative, not the progress that's been made or the forgiveness or the grace that's been given and the way you've been able to move forward. A lot of people they're like that spoiled significant other. They're like, oh, remember when you did this? And it's like, sure, but remember how we moved past that and we found grace and forgiveness there? And then same with our country. It's like, oh, you remember slavery? You remember all these atrocities back then? It's like, well, how do we move forward?
Mm-hmm.
Can we remember that? We can bring up the bad while still bringing up the, hey, look where we are now. We're the freest, most prosperous, open, just country ever.
Yeah.
Can we speak about that? But there's plenty of people, and a lot of those people on Twitter that
I don't go on Twitter.
like to just
disgusting.
say, hey, let's just stick with this negativity and forget the progress we've made.
I agree. And that's, people always forget this one little thing, that all this progress is because of the structure of government that we have today that allows for us to acknowledge a flaw in society, whether it's, I don't know, whether it's culturally or whether it is in policy or whether it's maybe with an industry, whatever it may be. And we're all able to look at that and say, you know, as a society, we disagree on this, or we disagree with this, and we're going to enact change that happens. And people get mad that it's a slow process, but it's intentionally slow so that radicals like AOC can't come in with a whirlwind election and then pass the Green New Deal after a 2-year stint, and then next thing you know, the country goes down the tank because it was a terrible policy that had a lot of passion and excitement behind it. And so the point is to move the country forward in a slow way so that we can evaluate where we're going wrong and come up with serious and long-term solutions. And that's really what led to this massive progress that we have, because we've been able to do that over hundreds and hundreds of years. Now, that being said, it makes me very sad to see the state of the country these days. But at the end of the day, a lot of people, I mean, we even hear it here in the Turning Point headquarters, they are in favor of starting over. They're in favor of the national divorce. They're in favor of not civil war, but let's just kick California out of the country and then we're going to be fine. And every episode of Freedom Papers basically looks at what people say these days about that, of how they'd rather be split up, and then looking to what they said back then when they were also arguing, should we split up or should we be together? And so I find it fascinating because this was back in 1787, and today, for some reason, people on both sides are taking for granted the fact that this debate has already taken place for why we are stronger together. And for some reason, we're having the debate all over again, as if we kick California out, it's not going to invite communist China right into California, where communist China would then be on our soil. So, like, it's a quick answer once you look at everything and compare, and then also look to what our founders said. But I'm not sure if you knew this. Our founders looked to things like ancient Rome, ancient Greece.
Yep.
They looked to Europe and the Tudor dynasty and Queen Elizabeth I and all of the people that came before us, all the republics that had been attempted. And they said, here's what worked, here's why each one failed, here's where we can add protections and security measures in our country to make sure that's the case. And really the big one was a system of federalism that allowed for state powers to check, for the people to provide checks on power, for the federal government to provide checks on power, this whole system of checks and balances. That's what really sets us apart. And I was actually at the TPUSA Live dinner when we were in Mar-a-Lago.
Yep.
Someone tested me. Oh my gosh, I got so nervous. Someone tested me, and I
remember hearing about this. Yep.
I was sitting at a table, and everybody at each contributor's table was they specialized in that. And so I sat at a whole table of American history nerds and like constitutional lawyers. Now, am I a lawyer? No. And was I asked if I was? Yes.
You had to put your lawyer hat on?
I was like, oh no, that's the point, that I'm not a lawyer. Like, that's the point of the show.
Oh, you want a lawyer? Oh, Aaron Elmore is actually over there.
I don't think they got it, because I was like, no, the whole point of the show is like, it's average person talking about it with average people. Like, we're not lawyers. Like, we're not
You're
doing
not an
lawyer
average
talk.
person.
Oh, thank you, John. So that was kind of funny. But one of them had said one of the biggest abilities for us to provide checks that has never been seen before in world history is the fact that states can, if they coordinate enough, can create a constitutional amendment. And I was like, oh, that's such a good point. So it's that kind of stuff that really makes me all excited, and I love to look at.
Well, that's what's nice about these things, too. Anytime anyone tunes into a piece of content where, I mean, I talk about sports all the time, but I need to learn from other people, too. And TPUSA Live, every day, I'm learning from you on the couch. I'm learning from the other contributors. I'm learning from the guests that we have. So you're always going to get great content, and we're always going to give people the truth, but there's always learning going on. And there's way too many people that feel like they can be complacent or that they already know enough. And that's where I feel like there needs to be a sense of humility behind that as well, where it's like, okay, well, I just learned from a lot of people at Mar-a-Lago, a lot of people that have been on this earth longer than I have. Some of those people just twice as long as maybe you, not me, because I'm getting up there in age, but that's what's fun. You learn about this stuff and you're like, oh, I didn't know that. That's a good idea. And then it leads to good civil discourse, good conversations, and we're able to learn a lot.
Yeah, heck yeah. Well, honestly, speaking of that, we should probably touch on Federalist Paper number 13 on it. We got so far into it. Whoops, we got all excited. But Federalist Paper 13, John, is called an Advantage of the Union in Respect to Economy and Government. It's written by Hamilton, but of course, Publius. And you were laughing at the name Publius, so I've got to call you out for that. But I don't know if you knew the backstory on this.
I'm 30, but I'm constantly acting like I'm 13. So,
so the story...
More like 3, that's his name.
The story with Publius is quite cool. It's because the Anti-Federalists were using words like Cato, and they were signing off with other ancient Greek and Roman names and all this stuff for their side, and then they picked Publius on the Federalist side because Publius is known as being a man that legislated and then saw through the policies that he enacted to save the Republic and to really carry it forward into a strong and enduring period. So instead of, I think what happened is Publius went up, and I'm forgetting the name, but he's compared, his historic story is compared a lot to a different man who basically had ideas and put them out there and then abandoned his country and didn't want to be there to actively legislate it, to actively see through the solutions, and so it failed, it collapsed. And so Publius was the counter to that, and he's somebody that said, here's the solutions, I'm going to see them through, I'm going to provide stability, and we're going to have peace for a long-term time. And that's why they wanted to pick Publius, because they wanted to give that same message to the American people that we're here to see this through for a long time, for an enduring amount of success. Isn't that sweet?
That's so sweet, because I think we need people like that. We need to come together, and I think that's what it talks about in Federalist number 13. A little bit that
you're like, bring it back, Morgan.
Little bit that I read. There is that aspect of I know for sure I'm a big ideas guy. I really am. But when it comes to just the nitty gritty, being a type A, very organized person, that's not me. So I need to work with people that can schedule things out and really stay on track. Like, I do a really bad job at that.
You would not be a Publius, you say?
No, not at all. But I think you need a little combination of that stuff.
Well,
but
actually,
I have a question first before you get to that. If you had a secret code name, like he did, what would yours be?
Oh, John,
have you thought of that yet? It's hard to put you on the spot, though.
I have thought of that, and I have not discussed this publicly, so I won't. But I will say,
come on,
I have this other thing. If anybody wants to help me, sometimes I imagine the end of the world happening, and it makes me sad. I'm not happy about it.
Sometimes I think you think about that all the time.
And so this is the thing. I'm like Mark Levin in an underground bunker. The country's gone to crap. The world, who knows? We can't contact them. Nobody knows how to communicate because like an EMP has hit the nation. Have you read the book 1 Second After? One of my favorite books.
I don't read a lot of books,
it's
Morgan, I'm sorry.
An electromagnetic pulse hits the country. There's no electricity anymore. Nobody can communicate. So unless you have like one of those old school radios or like a ham radio or whatever, you can't talk. So here's the thing. Morgan has a bunker where Morgan can broadcast to the entire country. Nobody knows who I am, though. And all they know
Federalist
is that
Papers
this one woman broadcasts to the nation on these cranky little radio stations to try and give them hope. And I'm like, what would my radio name be? Because you know the song of, like, the truckers, like Rubber Duck? And
yeah.
So I always am like, what would my name be? Like Apple Pie or something American.
I could see you bring up. I feel like you bring up apple pie. I feel like all the time.
I love apple
when
pie.
they said apple pie, it's just like.
Well, yeah, because there was a whole article that said America was racist or apple pie was racist. Have I not?
Did they ask apple pie what their thoughts were?
Have I not told you about that? That's like the one news story I talk about all the time because it's insane. It's cultural revolution, John.
My nickname for you will be apple pie.
Thank you. I mean, imagine me like because everybody's got the fun ones like Rubber Duck and all the things like. Yeah, what song is it? Convoy. Looks like we got us a convoy. Yeah. What would my convoy like CB radio name be? Apple Pie. I don't know, but I will not tell you what my like old Spartan name would probably be if I wrote as a Federalist person.
I'll get it out of you at some point.
This is like a derailed podcast, but let's get into a little bit of paper number 13. Yep. You were mentioning that you have some strong suits and other people have strong suits with like planning and stuff. So if we take that to a country by country, state by state level, the argument for why we would be stronger as a union, in this case, they're basically saying that we're going to coordinate and cooperate better and be more efficient with funds and with the use of tax dollars, with the use of our economic tools, if we all work together instead of being separate countries. And what I liked about that is they basically said, not a lot of people on the anti-federalist side are saying we should be individual states that turn into little tiny countries. But what they are saying is, maybe we should be 3 confederacies. And at the time, we're basically just the East Coast still. I mean, the Louisiana Purchase happened in 1803, so that's going to happen in a handful of years. But we are still a pretty small country just covering the East Coast. And they were saying we might split into 3 confederacies. And Publius says, now the anti-federalists are worried about, joining in together for one big country for one really big reason, and that's they don't want to repeat a monarchy. They don't want to repeat tyranny. They just got out of that situation with a revolutionary war. They don't want to do it again. And Publius makes the case that, well, because of these 3 large confederacies that you guys envision, these are already comparable in size as confederacies to the size of Europe, to the countries of Europe. And so the government that's going to be required to maintain order in that confederacy, it's still going to be potentially big. And the safer way to look at all of this is if we have multiple levels of balances of power, of checks on power, that will be provided if we all form together instead of having 3 rivaling countries that have their own individual and quite large systems of government that would be required for
because
those
if they're already
anyways.
pretty separated then, it's like, well, what's going to happen years from now? We already got our differences, and that divide, they think well, if it doesn't get better, it's definitely going to get worse.
Yeah, so the Federalist Paper 13 is short. It's literally 2 pages in this book at least, and it just
That's
makes
why
that
I read
case.
it, because it was nice and short. There was no pictures in there at all. There's no pop-up or anything, so not normally the material that I'd get into, but it was great.
Yeah, well, so you missed the previous papers, but it's all about why we shouldn't fight with enemies, why we be stronger together as a union when it comes to foreign affairs, and then why we should be stronger, and why we would be stronger when it comes to domestic affairs, because we would be avoiding civil war, we'd be cooperating instead of fighting each other. And then this one just continues on that same trend by saying, and it would be smarter for us with the economy, because we're going to be more efficient. Each area of the country has its own strong suits, and if we combine those strong suits, if we combine those assets of the economy, if we combine those goods and those raw materials, instead of fighting each other for them, instead of trying to trade each other for them and all the crap that comes with it, we're probably going to be stronger, especially on the international stage. And that's what it's really all about, because one of my favorite things about all this is you can kind of see the progress of the papers, where it goes from starting out in 2 through 5 is kind of how do we deal with the international powers that are going to be coming after us? How do we protect ourselves from them? But then it turns into, maybe Europe isn't actually a big problem for us because they're already fighting with each other, and that's why we shouldn't fight with ourselves, because then we won't be very competitive on the world stage. The same way that we look at Europe as not competitive because they're kept up in their own fights.
Yep.
But also, they're actually not that big compared to us. We're competition for them, and we're going to beat them probably soon. So that should be our mindset. So the mindset is interesting to watch develop of, we don't even have to just focus on protecting ourselves. We need to figure out how to be the strongest possible when we're entering the negotiating table, when we're entering the table as a world power.
And I think I love when you're talking about this stuff, talking about how it's not just this is not just some sort of Airbnb, VRBO you have here. This is the new world. This is a new place that you're going to just take over, and everybody across the seas, they need to look to us, and we need to come together, and we're stronger together. I think that's something that conservatives talk about quite a bit. That's why I love when we team up with other conservative outlets to put content out there too. And that's where I feel there's that aspect of we find strength in numbers, and we find that we're better together. And it reminds me of, obviously I'm going to get into the Bible side of this stuff.
Oh, I love that.
I always will. I know in 1 Corinthians it talks about that we're one body but many parts, that everybody has a specific role. Sure, we're a part of that same body, and everyone's got that role inside of that, and it's very essential. So what if the foot talks to the eye and says, I don't know, I don't really do what you do, I don't see, so I'm gonna go. How strong is that body really going to be? You need every single part of that body to really come together, and you make a difference. So you're better together. Everyone's got their specific roles, and that seems like what it's talking about in the States.
I love that. And kind of to finish that off, you guys. So paper number 11 was about why it started to go basically like from the issues of conflict. The papers start to transition into trade, into tax revenue, and now into commerce and the economy. And when we started to talk about commerce, paper 11 talks about why we need to develop a navy, because we need to be able to protect our trade, we need to protect our goods, we need to keep all of our different waters safe and connected in this country a whole. And so they wanted to create the navy. And part of it was about how in the South they've got the great lumber that could create the great ships, but in the North you've got the men who have the experience of navigating waters. And so you have the strong suits throughout the country. And
There's some manly men, by the way, too.
Right? I mean, I think of like the Boston men is what I think of. It's like the seamen there. And so if we split them up, then we're just kind of, both sides are going to end up fighting each other, and you have some assets on one side, some on the other. But if we combined and fought the world and had our presence on the world stage, all of us working together, we would be quite strong. And so that's the same mentality that's carried forward into paper 13 with, we will be a stronger economy if we don't split our goods up, if we don't split into different countries for a multitude of reasons. But one of those main things is just like, we are stronger together. We're going to coordinate together. Some areas of this country, obviously, I mean, look at the geography of America. It's incredibly diverse. And so that gives us a lot of really great assets and really great strong suits. And to divide us in that way would just really hinder us. And then, of course, when we look at what the Anti-Federalists were worried about, that big overarching government, they kind of answered that pretty simply and said, we understand your worry there, but hey, there's still going to be a big government there if you were a confederacy. And you're still going to have to worry about that in your lives. The safer thing for you is to have a balance of power between multiple levels of government. So I like that. You guys, John, do you have any last things to say?
Last thing I would say is it's always fascinating learning about the Federalist Papers, our founding documents, and knowing how way ahead of their time our founders were. And people like Publius. I love that name.
Oh, my gosh. John was like, is this really how it's pronounced?
I was like, really? That's how it goes? But they separated their emotions away from everything. And they knew we're going to look to the past. We're going to look at old governments. We're going to look at what is even just going on here in a few years trying to build this place. And this is how it's not only going to be established well now, but for future generations. And people need to hear this stuff. And keep it rolling. You're doing a great job, Morgan.
Oh, thanks, John. Well, I appreciate you for joining us. Thank you so much. And you guys, thanks for listening. Remember to go to tpusa.com/freedom papers, where you can reach us on all the platforms. So we've got the YouTube version, but also the podcast version. Subscribe to us on those. Follow us at Freedom Papers Podcast on Instagram. And be sure to get your own copies of the books. We all need to collect them in case the book burners come. They're going to come for our founding documents and all of the documents from the late 1700s first. I swear I can predict it myself right now. I'm signing off as Apple Pie. Signing off. Bye. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll see you next week.